Redditors that work directly for the super wealthy, let's say net worth 20 million and up. What are some of your best worst stories? I worked for a super wealthy Russian family. I had, mostly, only good interactions with them. But I had the benefit of being an American. They hired a maid from Nepal and were terrible to her. At times, their wealth would be super apparent. But at other times, when we'd be stacking firewood or foraging in the forest for mushrooms to cook that night, I really never thought about their money. I used to do some financial work for someone who became very wealthy through their very popular chain of surf gear. I had run through their tax position and had found a way for them to save a little over 2 million inches taxes a year by reshuffling some of their entities. Would have taken them around an hour to sit down and change everything. Lots of signatures on paperwork. Then maybe an hour extra of their time a year to administer. Their response? Nah, I don't want to waste that much time with paperwork. That's what I pay you guys for. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in a position where a bit of paperwork wasn't worth that much money. Heck, offer me $20 and I will gladly fill out paperwork for an hour for you. I worked for a guy who had some pretty major stakes in the oil business. He was pretty cool, but very weird about his money. He wanted these crazy projects done, but he always hired local kids to work for him. I was his landscaper, only had a 2-year landscape degree at the time, and didn't make all that much money. His wife owned like 100 plus sheep, just because she found it fun. His entire basement was full of survival supplies for when the world ends. He once asked me to price out installing a helicopter landing pad in his backyard in case anyone ever has a heart attack at one of his dinner parties. He had a second house on site, which he used to house his German shepherds. A friend dated a girl whose dad was worth about 2.8 B. This was nearly 20 years ago. When she turned 18, driving age in our country, she asked for a car. He bought her a second-hand Golf or something. We all expected a new Merc or something even nicer. But no. He was like, well, all you're going to do is scratch it parking or something. And anyway, you're 18. You need to have some room for improvement and not just start at the top. We laughed quite a bit. He also made a point of always being home for dinner. I guess he'd go back to work from home after. I worked for an upscale condo complex, starting at 500k and up. So most of these people were pretty wealthy. Most people were really nice. I got all kinds of Christmas gifts and even leftover things I didn't care about, like clothes and food. Best story. I was talking to a guy about why he drives a beat up car compared to everyone else. It was like a 1998 Yukon, and he said his thing was jets. Then all proceeded to take me to his private hangar after work. Showed me his 3 private jets and offered to fly me anywhere else anytime I needed. Just ask. Never took him up, unfortunately. The worst was a lady who was just never happy with anything we did. Just hated all employees. We were too nice. Took too long to get her car. Got her car too fast and was wasting gas. Took too long to say hi. It like that. Everyone hated her. Other than that, these people were really cool. Not work for. Friends with. Not a best or worst story, but an observation. My friend rarely demands special treatment. She's proud of this, and it's true. But what she doesn't always seem to understand is that she gets it anyway. Example, kid attends private school. Multiple parents are grumbling about curriculum change. Head of school calls her to hear her thoughts. The hot may explain, we were just checking in with some parents to see. And friend might believe that everyone is being contacted. As far as she knows, every parent is getting their say. But in fact, the school is not calling everyone. They may not be calling anyone else at all. She's being reached out to because she's a big donor and the school thinks they can't afford to have her unhappy. She hasn't threatened anything. She hasn't thrown her weight around. She hasn't demanded that they hear her opinion. But she's being catered to because the school respects her checkbook. Multiply this times however many organizations and businesses all over the city, and you get a person who goes through life with a somewhat different experience than other people. But they're not demanding it, and may not even be very aware of it. They think everyone gets the kind of attentive service and outreach that they enjoy. My sister-in-law worked on the maid staff for a mega wealthy, $1+ billion guy for several years. She was pregnant for a bit. then gave birth 2 months premature. You can imagine this was time consuming and expensive. The rich family gave her all the time she needed and paid for the entire process. Wound up costing over $100k. My niece is now 33 years old, so my experience was pretty positive. My boss is really chill. He treats everyone with respect and is always ready to learn something from someone. No superiority complex or unethical beliefs. Genuinely seems like a decent guy. Made me not trust him at first, as I assumed anyone that rich that's that nice is hiding something. But he's really genuinely a good person. Thank you for defining wealthy for your question. After graduating from university in 2012, I moved to southern France to work on mega yachts for the super wealthy and famous. One of the biggest yachts I worked on was Silver Angel. After my visa in Europe ran out, I came back to the States and worked on 2 other private yachts for families with a net worth in the hundreds of million and billion US dollars. What was fascinating was how money wasn't an object for some things, but they freaked out over other little costs. The first family I worked as the chief officer on their 120-foot long motor yacht that had 6 guest suites and 4 crew cabins. The funny thing is, they only used their yacht 1 day a week for lunch on Sundays. Every Sunday they would show up with their entourage of butlers, maids, and private chefs to do a 3-hour lunch cruise. Best part of the job was I had 6 days off a week, paid a full salary with benefits, lived on the yacht so had free room board with one of the private chefs making us every meal. They also consumed exclusively Fiji bottled water. Everything from their lemonade to the water the pasta was boiled in all came from those damn square Fiji bottles. The biggest time I ever got chewed out on the job was when I filled their dog's water bowl with tap water and was promptly and forcefully told that if I ever gave the dog anything other Fiji bottled water I would need to find another job. A co-worker used to be a housekeeper for an ultra-wealthy natural gas tycoon, $100 million net worth, and she said it was the easiest money she ever made. His daughter, who worked for him, frequently flew around the country for business, and this guy would pay my co-worker between $5,000 and $15,000 simply to accompany the daughter and keep her company on business trips that lasted a few days. Everything was top of the line luxury and all expenses paid. Private jet, 5-star hotels, she had her own room every time, 5-star restaurants, etc. I used to work for a law firm and saw all kinds of crazy shit. Here's a couple snippets. One woman inherited $15 million from her father, then left her boyfriend of 15 years, never got married, immediately causing her boyfriend to commit suicide. Another family, one brother got caught hiring a hitman to kill his brother over a $30 million inheritance. Additionally, this one divorce case with a biotech entrepreneur who earned over $100 million, wife left him because after 6 months of cashing out he became gay and was having sugar-fueled hooker parties with 5+ gay hookers every day. I can go on forever, but that's all I'm saying for now. My dad worked for an extremely wealthy man as his personal accountant. One day my dad was driving him to a meeting. He was super old, and the man asked to swing through McDonald's. After ordering a coffee for $1.06, they began pulling forward. The man asked my dad to reverse his car to the speaker to let them know he had a senior discount card. A man worth well over 20 mil, in a massive and nice luxury car, was not about to miss out on saving 4 cents at McDonald's. One of my boss vacation homes were featured in Architectural Digest. I came across the article just after I received my bonus for working 90+ hour weeks for 2 months straight. It ended up being a $50 Amazon gift card. I was a bank teller. 2 stories here. First, person my age, about 20, came in. Was a delight. He came in once a year to take his trust, which was $100 million, and take the interest out, about $48,000, once a year. That's all he lived off of. He was content and was modest. I loved it. Second, girl came in with her mom, actively whined at me for 10 minutes about how unfair it was her mom had all this money in her account and was making her live in poverty, with all her university fees paid, her rent and car covered, and she was only getting a tiny payment of $5,000 a month. She couldn't fathom surviving off it. The mother turns to me and says, well, I don't know. I thought that would be enough to live off of. Should I give her more? I meekly said that's $60,000 a year. I make $20,000 a year. I'm going to college full time and have a baby on the way. They both got really quiet and left. Never saw either of them again. Also, Mike Tyson banked there. But I won't talk about that. You said only people who were wealthy. Semicolon. They realize that their money can make menial tasks or certain unpleasantnesses unnecessary and don't mince words when throwing cash around to get their way. As long as they are respectful and other people are benefiting from this, I don't see a problem. I don't want to give a lot of info due to some people knowing my account, but I'd say I know a good number of millionaires. Some personally, many through my dad's work. I wouldn't say as high as 20 but a few over that. I'd say regardless of the net worth. There's two different types. Some you would never tell that they're wealthy. They dress like anyone else would. They don't flaunt it and they are still frugal. I think it just depends on the person and how they grew up. Usually, if they grew up poor or middle class, they tend to be like that. Then there's the polar opposite. The ones that drive the nicest cars, head to toe in designer clothes. All they talk about is money and they always feel the need to let you know what they have or how much some things cost. Usually these are the ones that grew up with money and inherited it from their parents. Two types. I'd say I know more polite and reserved ones though. However, like someone said on here also, a lot of them aren't as rich as they make it seem. They make a lot but they blow it, and if they were to lose their job they'd need to sell their house to live. It's not how much you make, it's also how you spend it. I have a friend who is worth several hundred million. He's a super nice and generous guy. You'd expect him to be conservative, wanting tax cuts and such, but he's not. He grew up in a country with universal healthcare and believes we should have it here in the US. I have a good one. I interned for this wealthy CEO in Houston. He was traveling to Mexico and had forgot his laptop, which had all of his stuff that he needed on it. He called the company and asked to have it sent to him. They said it would take 3 days to ship it even with priority. He paid me $500. Plus a plane ticket, and for a hotel for me to stay in for the night to fly his laptop down there so he could have it within 12 hours. I used to work in a private school, and a few dozen of the students were children of the local super rich from Bay Street. One mother started coming into the school every day to visit the uniform shop and buy new uniform items for her child. This went on for a week straight before the shop attendant asked her if everything was okay, the child keeping track of their clothes, etc. The mom responds with, "Oh, we're fine. It's just that our nanny is on vacation for 2 weeks, and I have no idea how to use the laundry machines at home." I was stunned into silence when the shop attendant passed that one along to me. I used to work for a composer who is worth around $100 million. He was generally a really nice guy and was genuinely hilarious. There would be some times where he was in a really bad mood and would lash out at people, specifically when it came to preparing food for him. One guy got chewed out for handing him a can of Coke by holding onto the top of it rather than around the side. One specific incident that sticks out was when somebody went to get a whole lobster for his dinner and set it out on the table. Our boss hadn't come out to eat it for hours, and it was probably around midnight at this point, so the kid just sat down and started eating. What dare no. Big boss comes into the dining room to eat his lobster and sees an intern sat down at the table wearing a bib eating his super expensive, now cold, lobster dinner. That kid didn't come into work anymore. I worked for a guy who is approaching billionaire status. He's a complete asshole. I won't say what business he is in, but he flies around in his jets visiting his businesses every few weeks. He is also major booster for a big college. His kids are okay. One is a party hound cokehead. The other is poised to take over the corporation. He treats his employees like complete it, only seeing them as dollar signs. If you aren't making money for him, you are expendable. His employee turnover rate is huge. Managers can expect to be out of a job within 18 months. Keep in mind he has over 40 stores that are managed. He is also the biggest chauvinist I've ever seen. He hits on every woman he comes across to the point of many lawsuits, which he doesn't care about. His accountants write checks. He once told a black guy that a monkey could do his job. He had to write a check. His quarterly meetings were all about how great he is and how we should all be like him and work 80+ hours a week. I don't miss that piece of it. I fell into a job that made me an apprentice groundskeeper for a man that owns a majority share in the local sports team. Best worst, nothing bad to say so far. It's been a year now. I barely interact with him, but when I do, I can just picture dollar signs floating above his head. His wife is super nice and down to earth. They had an employee appreciation party and I blew up pool floaties with her, and she talked about getting 3 pairs of glasses for $9 at the store. The best is being on the property 5 days a week and looking out over the water, listening to music. Also, he has a daughter that comes by from time to time and uses the pool with her friends. I've gotten a raise and 2 bonuses since being there. The bonuses were my 80 hours paycheck, matched. And I guess every once in a while there's tickets to the ball game right above the dugout. But I really don't care about sports, so it's nice to go just for the novelty. Edit. Oh. Also, one time they gave me 2 6-packs of beer to show thanks. I worked with 3 men that were all worth well over 20 million, and they were all so kind and very humble. I talked to 2 of them for hours ever so often and I couldn't get enough of their stories. One time, one of them sat down with me and sorted nuts and bolts for a few hours. He taught me about all kinds of different bolts, and although it wouldn't normally be fun, it was amazing. Just having a self-made millionaire taking the time out of their day to teach you about something so small is just such an awesome thing. Really runs the gamut. I have clients who are probably worth a few $1 million who are some of the nicest people I've met, and another couple who are clearly worth hundreds of millions of dollars who aren't exactly down to earth but are very polite and still have mid-90s cars as their daily drivers. Then I have had billionaire clients who I'm usually not formally introduced to but who I see interact with others, and they can be some of the most out of touch and entitled people you've ever seen. But I have friends who have clients in that same range who are incredibly generous and enlightened, so you really never know. I do believe that, in general, people who inherit money are more likely to be assholes. I don't work for him exactly, but I have a startup and our investor is a multimillionaire that owns the first facility outside of China to mass produce L-arginine as a supplement, as well as a large private labeling company for supplements and a huge packaging facility. We get to use his facilities at cost, and he frequently comes along with me when I'm going to oversee a manufacturing or packaging run of our products. It's weird when I get to catch glimpses of him outside of his office, because he is in no small way a bro deep down. I went to his house last week, and he had random things like a fridge that was a dedicated beer tap or tactical AR-15s laying around mixed in with all of his typical old money commodities. It's weird, because I see him as an older, more mature businessman scientist, but the moment that he cuts loose he lives essentially the fantasy life of a frat bro. Accountant here. I think what surprised me most was, most people who keep around $1 million in liquid are usually deeply spiritual. Meditation, yoga, follow Jesus but not churchgoers. Well educated but not rational, they nearly always follow their emotions. The funny thing is the poor and the rich are the same in terms of beliefs and lifestyles. Rich people dress like poor people, they simply could not give a duck about fashion or television. I've never met a self-proclaimed atheist rich person. That is exclusively for the middle to upper class, the people who are preoccupied with current affairs and television. Also, most rich people I've met are self-made businessmen, engineers, and farmers, not inherited wealth. I worked for an attorney who is worth around 20+ mil. These guys deal with a lot of frustrating people and situations. So when my boss fired me for buying the wrong printer paper for the office, I was less than surprised. It's tough. You have to be on point all the time. I don't know if this counts or not, but my dad used to work directly under the CEO of a pretty decent-sized construction company when I was in high school. I met him a few times. He lent me his lake house over spring break once, but I wouldn't say I really knew the guy all that well. But when I graduated high school with top honors, he took it upon himself to throw my graduation party and bust a bunch of my friends down to his ranch and had one of his pigs slaughtered and then one of his cows. When he found out a lot of my friends were Jewish and just threw this big ass opulent party in my honor. I think he did that for a lot of people in the company just because he likes to entertain, but it was still dope as hell. I've had mixed experiences. One was a complete D and wouldn't actually talk to my co-worker and I. He would relay information to his property manager who would then come over and talk with us. Mind you, we were 5 feet away from them and could hear everything. Worked for a multi-million-dollar company a while back. The owner here was a super awesome guy. He would often come into the break room right before my shift started and make coffee and shoot the breeze. He was super humble and an all-around likable guy. I worked in landscaping for one of the wealthiest people in New Zealand. His property is the most expensive ever sold here at 15 million NZD. It even came with a Maserati. He and his wife own some businesses. He never really talked about what they were. Super chill people. Never had a negative experience with them. Even when I interrupted him smoking what I assume was weed, may have been a legal high, he just laughed it off. I used to work for a guy who owned a temp agency in Charleston, SC. As the owner of a temp agency, he knew how little working people made. But this didn't stop him from one day berating the 2 girls who worked as his receptionist's office managers, making $7 an hour, because his take-home profit from the business had dropped from $40,000 a month to $25,000 a month. I could see the Karl Marx silhouettes forming in their eyes as he spoke. I worked for a very wealthy legally blind guy who owned a Tesla Model S. He couldn't drive it and his chauffeur drove him around in a different luxury car, so it was a bit bizarre that he owned one. I worked for someone in the past who is close to that rich and maybe is. There is so much money in the family, I don't think she really knows how much she is worth, as there is unlimited money and much more will come her way anytime there is a death in the family. Her family is so messed up that the money just seems sad. It isn't really the money that messed them up, but the money allows all the messed up people to make a lot of really bad decisions with very few consequences furthering the mess. They were the unhappiest family I have ever worked for. Every person in that family needed a year in some intensive therapy resort somewhere. They were very generous, but they were also always suspicious that people were after their money. They were nice to me and the other workers but horrible to each other. The kids were absolute nightmares to their parents and to each other. It was just sad to see something, money, that can improve your life instead end up just making really unhappy people even more miserable. Very pleasant, easy job, but they had no idea what life outside the bubble was like. She thought that a mutual friend's life was at risk because of where she lived. She lived in a fine average apartment in Miami. It really took me back at how worried she became. It's like she never stepped foot in an apartment then didn't rent for sub 3k. Then at certain times they tried to pull some money stuff people who were in school, pay at lower rates. But I made sure everyone was fairly compensated and put a stop to it. TLDR. Amazingly nice people who are not in touch with the reality of normal life. Basically just like me and you. You got rid of most of your stress. A good friend worked for a certain GOP elite political family who had a member running in the 2012 US presidential race. This family actually hired a high-end catering service to cater a food fight for a 7-year-old's birthday party. The staff set up a big tent outside, and then had the nannies lay out special painter's coveralls for the 25 kids at the party. Then, the kids destroyed $6k worth of food. My friend and the catering staff were horrified. The kids' parents all stood around watching and cracking up. The kids and families all got gift baskets worth 2-3k each as well. Vulgar, to say the least. At former job, my boss came over to a group of young employees, me included, seeking commiseration about the exorbitant cost of maintaining a 100-foot yacht. I worked for these guys. I was an architect in one of their US offices. My industry was hit particularly hard in 2008, but these guys handled the situation in the worst possible way, even as the market began to recover. About 2 months before I left, I remember going to the eye doctor and having my insurance rejected. After some investigation and prodding, it came out that they had stopped paying into people's insurance and 401(k)s. Even though they were still taking money out of people's checks, they eventually stopped paying for general service contracts, like trash removal in the office. So we would have an infestation of fruit flies in the office from trash sitting around for weeks. They went weeks and eventually, after I left, months without paying people. Meanwhile, These guys were scooping up real estate all over Manhattan. I ended up leaving and getting all the money I was owed, but others were not so lucky. I have former co-workers who are still out like $30,000 plus. TLDR, worked for some rich scumbags who bled the company dry. I hope they rot in a Southeast Asian prison. My mum has a catering company and we've catered for people worth $50,000 to a family worth over $1 bill. What I've noticed is the normal working folk tip well and are pretty nice. The rich we work for never tip. Always complain about stupid small things. Someone asked what wine they were drinking as it had been decanted, so I went and got the bottle. The owner ran over and took me to the side and said never show them the bottle. Then showed everyone that asked 2 minutes later and are generally rude. I worked for a very rich man who owned a string of retail stores. I was a college student and one day I went to work quite ill. The owner insisted I visit an urgent care center. When I returned, he asked what had transpired. I replied that I had a sinus infection, etc., and that I didn't fill my prescriptions because they cost too much money. He pulled out his wallet and peeled off a $100 bill and insisted I go straight to the pharmacy. I repaid every penny, but I never forgot how much it meant to me that he cared enough to send a lowly part-time college student retail worker to urgent care, then take the time to follow up to see if I was okay. I worked for some guys who were probably in the 5-15 mil range. They paid me to do ridiculous shit. One guy paid me $150 cash to put lights on his Christmas tree since he and his wife always fought over how to do it. The damn tree was 12 feet tall and it took me a while. Another one paid me to be his designated driver for holiday parties because he was making a run for governor. So basically I chauffeured him around in his Range Rover and hung out at his multi-million-dollar home while he was boozing it up with other socialites. These guys seemed to live in a world that was completely different from mine, but the stress and responsibilities they put up with were also more strenuous. I used to. Nothing really bad, with the exception of thinking that because he paid me marginally above minimum wage, I was his ducking slave. Due to this there was a steady increase in daily expenditures. He didn't usually sweat the smallest though, except for the time I got into a fender bender in one of his cars I used for work. Literally a dent in a pass door that could be popped out with no paint damage. He threw a hissy fit and I was like, duck this, I'm out. A few weeks later he apologized and hired me back because no one else could tolerate him. He is a mostly decent guy. We got along fine otherwise. I used to work in the diving sector, mostly military and research diving. We have had one special customer from Saudi Arabia who was worth millions over millions, probably billions. I am not sure. Well, however, he bought a mini rod for underwater use. He did not want to dive, so he used the roboter, which is made for usually biological research, just to look at the colorful fishes. The thing itself is worth about $200k. However, he also bought some safety equipment for his yard, etc. Well, to the story. This dude wanted us to do the service for the equipment. All over it would take about 5-6 hours. Well, he said no problem, I pay for a week. Make sure your technician is at the airport when I say it. So our technician went to the airport, got picked up in the private jet, worked there 5 hours and could dive 4 more days on a private beach where nobody is allowed to dive or do anything, and was flown back then. This guy was the most friendly rich dude I ever met, and he was really nice to everyone, not just people he wanted something from. Sure, he was a bit crazy when it comes to investments, but whatever, he had the money. BTW, this was his ship. Sadly he died in 2011 or 2012 I think. If you do a bit of research you know who it is I am talking about. I've met a lot of professional athletes in the $20 M plus club. For the most part, everyone is chill and low key. I was especially surprised with how gracious and down to earth they were. At that level I'd imagine it would be easy to get away with being a D. The only asshole athletes I dealt with were on the younger, less established side. I was working as an architectural model maker for a developer who was trying to put up an ugly ducking building in the middle of Mansion House, London. Anyways, he had this dog super special trained so that it would only obey his commands. So I was working on adding some stuff to a display in his office and the dog was under my feet. So I said really nicely, can you go lay down over there please, and it did. I was fired on the spot. Took me a moment to realize actually, that's me. I work for someone worth much more than that. And I think that says it all. The man won't spend more than $10 on a lunch for himself. Drives an old station wagon that he got second hand. Would eat cereal every night if his wife let him. Constantly has holes in his white button down shirts. I am tempted to rip them even more so he won't forget he can't wear them. No help around the house beyond some landscaping. Nothing flashy at all ever. Very nice. Old school. Kinda guy.